it exhausts me. I'm sure like it exhausts everybody else to talk about Aaron Rodgers. But when it is prevalent and when it is meaningful, we have to address it. And I think some comments today and in the last 24 hours made by Steelers linebacker Patrick Queen, it poses a very, very interesting dilemma that Pittsburgh once again finds themselves in. Rodgers still hasn't committed to returning to the Steelers in 2026. I don't know about you. I think he's coming back. I think we would have gotten the rather quick retirement from Aaron Rodgers. But then again, maybe he didn't want to steal the spotlight from Mike Tomlin. Now you got Mike McCarthy as the head coach there. Of course, he and Rodgers won a Super Bowl in Green Bay. They had a really good relationship until things kind of fell apart in Green Bay. But linebacker Patrick Queen said on Good Morning Football today, he thinks Rodgers is 50-50 to retire. So we're talking Aaron Rodgers, but like I said, we're 9 days away from the draft, and the Steelers, they need an answer, considering they have Mason Rudolph and Will Howard. Will Rodgers show up on the stage in Pittsburgh on draft night and announce he's coming back? I don't even know if that would get a positive reaction from the fans, but I guess first and foremost, I want to get your thoughts on it. Where do you think Aaron Rodgers lies in terms of coming back? Are you sold that he's coming back and for sure this is just him playing it out? Or do you actually think there's a chance he retires here in the next week or so?
Well, I think, number one, we're talking about one of the more volatile players in the league. He's very unpredictable. It's good luck finding anybody that knows what's going on in Aaron Rodgers' head on a day-to-day basis. I think, when you look at his situation in Pittsburgh, I think last year was a success, especially compared to his time in New York with the Jets, which was a complete disaster. Pittsburgh, they actually end up winning the division thanks to the Ravens missing a field goal at the end of the game. Pittsburgh gets in. Of course, they don't go anywhere because they're not really built for sustainable success right now. Pittsburgh has been one of the more year-to-year rosters in all of football. And then you've had the Mike Tomlin of it all, where he just refuses to have a losing record with them. So they just always hover around the middle of the pack. And last year they were good enough to win a division that wasn't as good as people expected it to be. I think there is a good chance that Rodgers comes back, but of course there's a chance that he retires as well. If I'm Pittsburgh, I don't think Rodgers coming back or retiring should impact how they approach the quarterback position. You need a quarterback for the future anyway. And if you talk to people in Pittsburgh, some of them will tell you that the Steelers are kind of high on Will Howard and wanting to see what he can develop into. I don't necessarily buy the Will Howard stock. Never really have. He was okay at Ohio State, but never really viewed him as a guy that if you're a franchise, you want to give him the keys to the Corvette. And look, to the Steelers' credit, I actually think they've made some pretty solid moves this offseason and adding to their talent pool, especially on the offensive end. So if I'm them, I'm looking at quarterback regardless of what happens with Aaron Rodgers. But I think Patrick Queen is probably spot on. It probably is a 50-50 scenario that he does come back. If you're Pittsburgh, you should learn from last offseason to not just sit around and wait for this guy, especially with the draft a couple of weeks away. And he is clearly in no rush to give them any type of answer, knowing that the draft is right around the corner. So I would approach it as if you don't have him, because again, even if you do, you still have to figure out your quarterback for the future. And that's been an issue for the Steelers ever since Ben Roethlisberger retired. They haven't had that guy that they can kind of build around and feel like can elevate their team since Big Ben has been gone. They've gone with the Mason Rudolphs. They've gone with Russell Wilsons. They've tried to get these Band-Aids, and Rodgers is the latest of their Band-Aids. I actually thought Rodgers was okay last year. Maybe he could be somewhat decent again this year if he does return to them. But again, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers, at some point, they have to start focusing on the future of their franchise.
Yeah, and look, and that's a good question that you pose. And by the way, the Steelers have the 20th overall pick in this draft, or 21st overall pick, which is a very similar pick to when they drafted Kenny Pickett. That is the last time they drafted a quarterback in the first round when they took the chance, right? Because they were trying to find the bridge from Big Ben. They were trying to find the successor, and they drafted Kenny Pickett with the 20th overall pick in 2022. The one time they did take their gamble on their quarterback of the future, it didn't work out. It didn't work out. It failed miserably. And like you said, since then, they've tried the stopgaps. They've tried the Band-Aids. Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Mason Rudolph, who, by the way, who took over at the end of the season a couple of years ago and played pretty well and then put up a decent showing against the Bills in the playoffs. He's still on the roster. I don't care what Steelers fans will say, because we were in this same situation a year ago where Steelers fans were like, screw Aaron Rodgers. He's playing us all. He's flirting with us and he's teasing us and he's leaving us out to dry. I mean, hell, even some of the Steelers players were throwing Rodgers under the bus, right? Cam Hayward, and then basically walked it back and backtracked it because they realized that just like last year, Aaron Rodgers is still the best option at quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers this season. So, yeah, they're waiting on him to give an answer. I tend to think that answer's probably already been communicated, despite what he says if he goes on Pat McAfee again shortly or whatever he, cryptically posts or whatever we hear from Omar Khan, the Steelers GM, or Art Rooney. I think Rodgers is coming back. Are we going to get this big, grand, like WWE-style entrance at the draft next week? I don't know, because I do think there are a lot of Steelers fans that don't like Rodgers, even though, again, you won the division last year. Despite Steelers fans, a pocket of them wanting Tomlin out the door and wanting Rodgers to go away, you win the division. In a division that the Bengals going into the season were once again supposed to be the favorite, and Joe Burrow, gets hurt again. The Ravens with Lamar Jackson, and it's the Steelers again who win that division, lo and behold, last year. So Rodgers, is he anywhere near his best? No. Is he 42 years old now? Yes. He still put up 3,300 yards with 24 touchdowns and 7 picks. There were plenty of highs. Yes, and there were plenty of lows. That playoff game against Houston was an abomination. The fact that they nearly blew their season against Cleveland in Week 17, and then they needed the Ravens to choke and collapse against them in Week 18 on Sunday Night Football. Rodgers is still the best answer, and so I really do genuinely think if they don't have that answer already, they need it by draft night, because if not, at 21 overall, if he is still there, would you draft Ty Simpson if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers? I know you mentioned Will Howard. I mean, they got him last year with a 6th-round pick. And Steelers fans can say all they want. Oh, he's the future. Look what he did at Ohio State. They drafted him in the 6th round. So is that somebody they really wanted to turn the keys over to the franchise? No, because they would have done it. They would have said, hey, Aaron, sorry, man, you can retire, but the door's not open here. We're moving on to Will Howard. And the fact that that hasn't happened, I think they are waiting on Aaron Rodgers. And I don't think they're going to draft Ty Simpson. But at 21, if we get there on Thursday night and he's still available, it's worth asking, would the Steelers grab him and try to make him the successor to Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I don't think that they would. To go back to your point about Kenny Pickett, it would almost feel like that all over again. If you go back to that Kenny Pickett draft, he had a lot of concerns coming out, and he had the hand issue. He has small hands. I remember that being one of the things with him. And, and Pittsburgh ended up going with him because they needed a quarterback instead of, maybe going with somebody in the later rounds, maybe somebody that did have questions as well, but didn't come in with some of those 1st-round expectations. And I think when you talk about Pittsburgh fans that wanted Aaron Rodgers gone, that wanted Mike Tomlin gone despite the success, I think a lot of them just want to see this team bottom out finally. Because like I mentioned, with Mike Tomlin, they've consistently been in the middle, and that's where you don't want to be, because then you're kind of handcuffed to have to settle for the Ty Simpsons of the world, the Kenny Pickett's of the world. They want to, and look, they won the division last year, but we all saw what happened in the postseason. They weren't a playoff team. They weren't. And I'd make the argument that maybe nobody in the AFC North was a playoff team. The Ravens were decimated with injuries all year. They weren't as good as everybody thought they'd be. The Browns are the Browns, and the Bengals just can't get out of their own way. But I think with the Steelers, I think a lot of fans just want to see them finally, not necessarily tank, but maybe not end up fighting for that last wild card spot. Maybe not end up fighting for the division in week 17 and 18 when you're not a team that's really going to make any noise in the postseason. So that would give them the opportunity to maybe pick in the top 7 and be able to go get that quarterback that maybe that they're looking for to build around. But how it's been for them, and now with Mike Tomlin gone, maybe we'll see, it finally does bottom out. Maybe he's been a guy that's done more with less. And I've always been somebody that points the finger at Mike Tomlin a little bit as well for their lackluster rosters that they put together. He's been a big part of the decision making in terms of the personnel that the Steelers are bringing in. So now with him gone and you bring in McCarthy, maybe they do finally bottom out and they get into that top 7, top 10 pick next year and beyond, because I think a lot of the fans just really want to see this team hit the reset button and finally build this team from the ground up. This was one of the oldest teams in the National Football League, especially on the defensive side last year. They were the most expensive defense in the league and the oldest at the same time, and they didn't get their money's worth with that unit. So I think a lot of Pittsburgh wants to see them just hit the reset button, commit to that, and Rodgers doesn't fit that. Having Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback does not signal we're trying to hit the reset button. We're trying to build this thing from the ground up. Maybe a year of Will Howard going out there learning on the fly, maybe that will actually get them the result that they're looking for to go into next offseason and really put this roster together the way that they'd like.
Number to join the show, 310-840-4910. What do you think the Steelers should do in the draft at 21 overall? Should they take a risk and draft Ty Simpson and try to, basically Kenny Pickett part 2, hope that he's the successor to Aaron Rodgers? Hell, if Aaron Rodgers retires, is that your starting quarterback there? And also, you make a tremendous point, Cordell, about what the Steelers fans have been going through. It's football purgatory, right? You're in that middle. Not good, not bad enough to tank and completely lose and be a top 5 pick and be horrible, and yet not good enough despite making the playoffs almost every year for the last decade. They haven't won a playoff game since 2017. They've lost 7 straight. Imagine telling a fan, hey, you're going to make the playoffs almost every year. You're going to win the division multiple times, but you're probably not going to win a Super Bowl. What would you rather have? And I think it's so easy to say, oh, well, of course we want the playoffs every year because you never know. All you got to do is get in. And yet Steelers fans have witnessed that harsh reality that they really are so far from being a Super Bowl team. Even in years past when the Chiefs and Mahomes were at their peak and Josh Allen and the Bills were knocking on the doorstep. Mahomes and the Chiefs missed the playoffs last year. Lamar and the Ravens missed the playoffs. It felt like it could have been wide open. The Patriots, were at the top of it with Denver, and yet Pittsburgh was still miles away from being a Super Bowl contender. So I can't blame any Steelers fans for actively saying, you know what, let's bottom out, let's be terrible, and let's tank. But this franchise, they know how to live in that middle, man. They know how to just be good enough. I do give them credit, though, this year, because I honestly think Rodgers back this year at quarterback, Cordell, I think they're a playoff team again. I really do, because I like the moves they've made in free agency. And the big one, they haven't had a number 2 receiver, right? I mean, they get DK Metcalf, but obviously then, they trade away George Pickens. Now you've got DK Metcalf, and you pair him with Michael Pittman, who I like coming over from the Colts. And so the other options behind that aren't that great, but at least you have a number 2 wide receiver. They signed Rico Dowdle in the offseason. And the defense, which has normally been the calling card of the Steelers, was pretty mediocre last year. They bring in Jamel Dean to play corner. They bring in Jaquan Brisker to play safety. They bring in Asante Samuel Jr. So they got much younger in the secondary. I think the team outside of Aaron Rodgers probably got a win or 2 better on paper. And you throw Rodgers in coming back. Like, if he could do what he did last year at 41, why can't he do it again at 42? He's got a bona fide number 2 receiver now. Then it just comes down to, well, do you believe in Mike McCarthy? Can he pull off the same magic act that Mike Tomlin was doing every single year? And look, I'm not saying Mike McCarthy is a tremendous elite coach. He's got a Super Bowl to his name, a lot of it thanks to Rodgers, but he kind of had been doing the same thing with the Dallas Cowboys, just winning, being good enough, making the playoffs every year, and then, failing in January. Even the 2 years ago when they had all the injuries, they finished strong. So you kind of get you almost get like a copy and paste of Mike Tomlin just in Mike McCarthy. And it does feel like we're headed down the same track, right? The Steelers will probably win 10 games. They'll probably make the playoffs, and they'll probably get beat in the wild card round. And so maybe it's just another painful ending in January for Steelers fans, but I do think they're in a better position this year than last year. And Rodgers coming back, I don't think they should be drafting a quarterback here. You mentioned they have Will Howard, they have Mason Rudolph. You run it back with Rodgers, and you hope for the best, and you hope to get in the playoffs. Like, I'm sorry, I can never advocate to tank because that doesn't even guarantee you a great quarterback. It never does.
No, I totally agree. And I've been pleasantly surprised with some of the moves that Pittsburgh's made this offseason. You mentioned the Michael Pittman trade. I mean, that was great. I think the world of Michael Pittman. Like right. I mean, I don't know what the Colts were doing. And look, I get it. They bring back Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce has been the yards per catch king in the NFL the last couple of seasons. But Michael Pittman was a big part of what the Colts did offensively as well. And I think he's going to be a really nice fit with that Pittsburgh offense. DK Metcalf is kind of that guy that stretches the field for them. He can run the entire route tree, but he's this big body guy that Rodgers likes to throw the go ball to, and he could definitely catch the ball over the middle. But Pittman has made a living off of, as even though he's a big guy, he's made a living off of these bubble screens. He's made a living off of this short to intermediate routes. And I think that's what Rodgers at this stage of his career, that's what he wants to do. He wants to get the ball out fast. We just saw it last year. Kenneth Gainwell, I believe, and this is off the top of my head, but I think he led the Steelers in receptions last year as their backup running back. So, I mean, if he didn't lead them, he was definitely top 2 or 3, and he was a huge part of their passing game for sure. So I think Rodgers having Pittman, that big body guy that can catch the ball in traffic, that can make something happen after the catch, and he's a great red zone target as well. I think that's going to be great. And I really think Pat Freiermuth can be in line for a bounce back year this year. I think Pittsburgh was a little they seem to be all over the place in terms of their tight end room last year. And I think they added too many pieces to that room after they already paid Pat Freiermuth. And he was just never really that consistent part of that offense the way that you thought he'd be, because Aaron Rodgers historically loves his tight ends. And everybody thought Pat Freiermuth would have a great year last year, and he didn't. And I think Jonnu Smith coming over there kind of jumbled that up. And you also had the big fella, Hayward, that was a part of that as well. So, yeah, I do think Pittsburgh could be in line for a bounce back year this year. Defensively, I just wonder if it's their culture is defense to play there's a standard over there when it comes to defense because of the steel curtain and everything. And Mike Tomlin did a great job of keeping that going. I am curious to see, when you talk about the culture of the Pittsburgh Steelers, is Mike McCarthy able to keep that going? Is he able to raise the floor for this roster the way that Mike Tomlin has done, maybe to a fault, throughout his career?
Yeah, and also remember tight end Darnell Washington too, the big human battering ram from Georgia that broke his forearm at the end of last season. I'm interested to see what role he could have, and maybe Pat Freiermuth doesn't have a bounce back year, but maybe that's because Darnell Washington takes a big step forward. Yeah, look, I think with Mike McCarthy, you're hoping that he's not Mike Tomlin. That's my fear, right? That he's good enough to maintain, right? The standard is the standard. How many times did Mike Tomlin say that? Look, maybe Mike McCarthy is going to be even better than Mike Tomlin. Maybe part 2 for Mike McCarthy, or part 3, I should say now, wins a Super Bowl with the Packers, gets to the playoffs almost every year with the Cowboys, but was a January failure. Maybe this is different. Maybe this is, or maybe it's not. Or, I think Steelers fans they should want either, like you said, you want opposite ends of the spectrum. You want Mike McCarthy and Rodgers to write a miracle Hollywood script here and get to the AFC title game, or you want him to go 4-13 and Rodgers just, he basically is like 41 going on 60 before our very eyes. You don't want that middle ground, but I think the Steelers made enough good moves here that they have a pretty high floor going into this season. I think that floor is 8 wins at the minimum. And we both think they're going to be a playoff team this year. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, but I think in a week from now, we'll be 48 hours away from the draft, and we'll have the news by then that Aaron Rodgers is coming back to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And whether he announces it or not, I would be shocked if he ends up, announcing his retirement right before the draft and waiting all this time.